Chapter 61. I rewound my watch, and in precisely 20 minutes, the same two men as before came back into the cell. The black clothes made them look more aggressive, more fascist than they were. There was nothing particularly brutal about their faces. The blond Adam stood in front of me. In his hand he carried an incongruous small grip. "Please, not fight." He set the grip on the table and fished inside it. Came up with 2 pairs of handcuffs. I held out my wrists contemptuously and allowed myself to be linked to the other 2 beside me. Now he produced a curious black rubber mouth mask, concave with a thick projection that one had to bite. "Please." I put this on. No hurt. We both hesitated a moment. I had determined that I wouldn't fight, that it would be better to keep cool and wait until a time when I could hurt someone I really wanted to hurt. He cautiously held out the rubber gag, and I shrugged. I took its black tongue between my teeth, a taste of disinfectant. Adam expertly fastened the straps behind. Then he went back to the case for some wide black adhesive and taped the edges of the gag against my skin. I began to wish I had shaved. The next move took me by surprise. Adam knelt and pushed my right trouser leg up to above the knee and fastened it there with an elastic garter. Then I was made to stand again. With a warning gesture that I was not to be alarmed, he pulled my sweater back over my head and forced it down till it hung from my wrists behind me. Then he unbuttoned my shirt to the bottom and forced the left side back until the shoulder was bare. Next he produced 2-inch-wide white ribbons, each with a blood-red rosette attached from the grip. He tied one round the top of my right calf, another under my armpit and over the bare shoulder. Next, a black circle, some 2 inches in diameter and cut in adhesive tape, was fixed like a huge patch on the middle of my forehead. Finally, with one last domesticating gesture, he put a loose-fitting black bag over my head. I was more and more inclined to struggle, but I had missed my chance. We moved off. I had a hand on each arm. They stopped me at the end of the corridor, and Adam said, "Slow. We go upstairs." I wondered if upstairs meant into the house, or was just bad English. I towed forward and we climbed into the sun. I could feel it on my bare skin, though the bag occluded all but the thinnest glints of light. We must have walked some 200 or 300 yards. I thought I could smell the sea. I wasn't sure. I half expected to feel a wall against my back, to find myself facing a firing squad. But then once again they halted me, and a voice said, "Downstairs now." They gave me plenty of time to maneuver the steps, more than those leading to my cell, and the air grew cool. We went round a corner and down yet more steps, and then I could hear by the resonance of the sounds we made that we had entered a large room. There was also a mysterious, ominous smell of burning wood and acrid tar. I was stopped. Someone pulled the bag from my head. I had expected to see people, but I and my 2 guards were alone. We were at one end of a huge underground room, the kind of enormous cistern the size of a small church that is found under some of the old Venetian Turkish castles that are crumbling away in the Peloponnesus. I remembered having seen one very like it that winter at Pylos. I looked up and saw 2 telltale chimney-like openings. They would be the blocked-off necks at ground level. At the far end there was a small dais, and on the dais a throne. Facing the throne was a table, or rather 3 long tables, put end to end in a flat crescent and draped in black cloth. Behind the table were 12 black chairs and an empty 13th place in the middle. The walls had been whitewashed up to a height of 15 feet or so, and over the throne was painted an 8-spoked wheel. Between table and throne, against the wall to the right, was a small tiered bank of benches like a jury box. There was one completely incongruous thing in this strange courtroom. The light I saw it by came from a series of brands that were burning along the side walls, but in each of the corners behind the throne was a battery of projectors trained on the crescent-shaped table. They were not on, but their cables and serried lenses added a vaguely sinister air of the interrogation room to the already alarming Ku Klux Klan ambience. It did not look like a court of justice, but a court of injustice, a star chamber, an inquisitorial committee. I was made to go forward. We marched down one side of the room, past the crescent table, and up toward the throne. I suddenly realized that I was to sit there. They paused for me to step up on the dais. There were 4 or 5 steps leading to a little platform at the top, on which stood the throne. Like the roughly carpentered dais, it was not a real throne, simply a bit of stage property painted black, with armrests, a pointed back, and columns on either side. In the middle of the solid black panel was a white eye, like those that Mediterranean fishermen paint on the bows of their boats to ward off evil. A flat crimson cushion. I was made to sit. As soon as I had done so, my guard's ends of the handcuffs were unlocked, then immediately snapped on to the armrests. I looked down. The throne was secured to the dais by strong brackets. I mumbled through the gag, but Adam shook his head. I was to watch, not to speak. The other 2 guards took up positions behind the throne, on the lowest step of the dais, against the wall. Adam, like some mad valet, checked the handcuffs, pulled away the shirt I had tried to shrug back onto my left shoulder, then went down the steps to the ground. There he turned as if to the altar in the church and made a slight bow, after which he went round the table and out through the door at the end. I was left sitting with the silent pair behind me and the faint crackle of the burning torches. I looked round the room, forced myself to observe it dispassionately. There were other cabalistic emblems. On the wall to my right, a black cross. Not the Christian cross, because the top of the upright was swollen, an inverted pear shape. To the left, facing the cross, was a deep red rose, the only patch of color in the black and white room. At the far end, over the one large door, was painted in black a huge left hand, cut off at the wrist, with the forefinger and little finger pointing up, and the 2 middle fingers holding down the thumb. The room stank of ritual, and I have always loathed rituals of any kind. I kept repeating the same phrase to myself, "Keep dignity, keep dignity, keep dignity." I knew I must look ridiculous with the black cyclops eye on my forehead and the white ribbons and the rosettes, but I somehow had to contrive not to be ridiculous. Then my heart jolted. A terrifying figure. Suddenly and silently in the doorway at the far end, Herne the Hunter, a Neolithic god, a spirit of darkness, of northern forests, of a time before kings as black and chilling as the touch of iron. A man with the head of a stag that filled the arched door, who stood silhouetted, giant, unforgettable image against the dimly lit whitewashed wall of the corridor behind. The antlers were enormous, as black as almond branches, many-tined, and the man was in black from head to foot, with only the eyes and the nostril ends marked in white. He imposed his presence on me, then came slowly down the room to the table, stood centrally and regally behind it for another long moment, then moved to the extreme left end. By that time I had noted the black gloves, the black shoes beneath the narrow soutane-like smock he wore, that he had to move slowly because the mask was slightly precarious, being so large. The fear I felt was the same old fear, not of the appearance, but of the reason behind the appearance. It was not the mask I was afraid of, because in our century we are too inured by science fiction and too sure of science reality ever to be terrified of the supernatural again, but of what lay behind the mask, the eternal source of all fear, all horror, all real evil. Man himself. Another figure appeared and paused, as they were all to do, in the archway. This time it was a woman. She was dressed in traditional English witch costume, a brimmed black peaked hat, long white hair, red apron, black cloak, and a malevolent mask, a beaked nose. She hobbled, bent-backed, to the right end of the table, and set the cat she was carrying on it. It was dead, stuffed in a sitting position. The cat's glass eyes were on me, her black and white eyes, and the stag man's. Another startling figure, a man in a crocodile head, a bizarre maned mask that projected forwards, more negroid than anything else, with ferocious white teeth and bulging eyes. He hardly paused, but came swiftly to his place beside the stag, as if the wearer was uncomfortable in costume, unused to such scenes. A shorter male figure came next, an abnormally large head in which white cube teeth reached in a savage grin from ear to ear. His eyes seemed buried in deep black sockets. Round the top of his head there rose a great iguana frill. This man was dressed in a black poncho and looked Mexican, Aztec. He moved to his place beside the witch. Another female figure appeared. I felt sure it was Lily. She was the winged vampire, an eared bat head in black fur, 2 long white fangs. Below her waist she wore a black skirt, black stockings, black shoes, slim legs. She quickly went to her place beside the crocodile, the clawed wings held rigidly out, bellying a little in the air, uncanny in the torchlight, a great flickering shadow that darkened the cross and the rose. The next figure was African, a folk horror, a corn doll bundle of black strips of rag that hung down to the ground in a series of skirted flounces. Even the head mask was made of these rags, with a top knot of 3 white feathers and 2 huge saucer eyes. It appeared armless and legless, and indeed sexless, some ultimate childish nightmare. It shuffled forward to its place beside the vampire, added to the chorus of outrageous stares. Then came a squat succubus with a Bosch-like snout. The following man was by contrast mainly white, a macabre Pierrot skeleton, echo of the figure on the wall of my cell. His mask was a skull. The outline of the pelvis had been cleverly exaggerated, and the wearer had a stiff, bony walk. Then an even more bizarre personage. It was a woman, and I began to doubt whether, after all, the vampire was Lily. The front of her stiffened skirt had the form of a stylized fishtail, which swelled up into a heavy, pregnant belly, and then that, in turn, above the breasts, became an up-pointed bird's head. This figure walked forward slowly, left hand supporting the swollen 8 months belly, right hand between the breasts. The beaked head, with its almond-shaped eyes, seemed to stare up toward the ceiling. It was beautiful, this fish-woman-bird, strangely tender after the morbidity and threat of the other figures. In its upstretched throat I could see 2 small holes, apertures for the eyes of the real person beneath. 4 more places remained. The next figure was almost an old friend, Anubis, the jackal-head, alert and vicious. He strode lithely to his place, a Negro walk. A man in a black cloak, on which were various astrological and alchemical symbols in white. On his head he wore a hat with a peak a yard high and a wide nefarious brim. A kind of black neck covering hung from behind it. Black gloves and a long white staff surmounted by a circle, a snake with its tail in its mouth. Over the face there was no more than a deep mask in black. I knew who it was. I could see the gleaming eyes and the implacable mouth. 2 more places at the center there was a pause. The rank of figures behind the table stared up at me, unmoving in total silence. I looked round at my guards, who stared ahead like soldiers, and I shrugged. I wish I could have yawned to put them all in their place. and to help me in mine. 4 men appeared in the white corridor. They were carrying a black sedan chair, so narrow that it looked almost like an upright coffin. I could see closed curtains at its sides and in front. On the front panel was painted in white the same emblem as the one above my throne, an 8-spoked wheel. On the roof of the sedan was a kind of black tiara, each of whose teeth ended in a white meniscus, a ring of new moons. The 4 porters were black-smocked. On their heads they had grotesque masks, witch doctor faces in white and black, and then rising from the crown of each head, enormous vertical crosses a yard or more high. Instead of breaking off cleanly, the ends of the arms and the upright of these crosses burst out in black mops of rag or raffia, so that they seemed to be burning with black flame. They did not come directly to the center of the table, but as if it was some host, some purifying relic, carried their coffin sedan round the room, up the left side, round in front of my throne, between me and the table, so that I could see the white crescent moons, the symbols of Artemis Diana, on the side panels, then on down the right side to the door again, and then finally back to the table. The poles were slipped out of the brackets, and the box was lifted forward to the central empty place. Throughout, the other figures remained staring at me. The black porters went and stood by the brands, 3 of which were almost extinguished. The light was getting dim. Then the 13th figure appeared. In contrast to the others, he was in a long white smock, or alb, that reached to the ground, whose only decoration consisted of 2 black bands round the end of the loose sleeves. He carried a black staff in red-gloved hands. The head was that of a pure black goat, a real goat's head, worn as a kind of cap, so that it stood high off the shoulders of the person beneath, whose real face must have lain behind the shaggy black beard. Huge, back-swept horns left their natural color, amber-glass eyes, the only ornament a fat, blood-red candle that had been fixed between the horns and lit. I wished I could speak, for I badly needed to shout something debunking, something adolescent and healthy and English, a Dr. Crowley, I presume, but all I could do was to cross my knees and look what I was not, unimpressed. The goat figure, his satanic majesty, came forward with an arch-diabolical dignity, and I braced myself for the next development. A black mass seemed likely. Perhaps the table was to be the altar. I realized that he was lampooning the traditional Christ figure. The staff was the pastoral crook, the black beard Christ's brown one, the blood-red candle some sort of blasphemous parody of the halo. He came to his place. The long line of black carnival puppets stared at me from the floor. I stared down the line. The stag devil, the crocodile devil, the vampire, the succubus, the bird woman, the magician, the coffin sedan, the goat devil, the jackal devil, the Pierrot skeleton, the corn doll, the Aztec, the witch. I found myself swallowing, looking round again at my inscrutable guards. The gag was beginning to hurt. In the end, I found it more comfortable to stare down at the foot of the dais. Perhaps a minute passed like that. Another of the brands stopped flaming. The goat figure raised his staff, held it up a moment, then made to lay it on the table in front of him, but he must have got it caught in something, because there was a comforting little hitch in the stage business. As soon as he had managed it, he raised both hands sacerdotally, but fingers devil-horned, and pointed at the corners behind me. My 2 guards went to the projectors. Suddenly the room was flooded with light, and after a moment of total stillness, flooded with movement. Like actors suddenly off stage, the row of figures in front of me began removing their masks and cloaks. The cross-headed men by the brands turned and took the torches and filed out toward the door, but they had to wait there because a group of 20 or so young people appeared. They came in loosely, in ordinary clothes, without any attempt at order. Some of them had files and books. They were silent and quickly took their places on the tiered side benches to my right. The men with the torches disappeared. I looked at the newcomers, German or Scandinavian, intelligent faces, students' faces, one or two older people among them, and 3 girls, but with an average age in the early 20s. 2 of the men I recognized from the incident of the ridge. All this time, the row of figures behind the table were disrobing. Adam and my 2 guards moved about helping them. Adam laid cardboard folders with white labels in each place. The stuffed cat was removed, and the staffs all the paraphernalia. It was done swiftly, well rehearsed. I kept flashing looks down the line as one person after another was revealed. The last arrival, the goat head, was an old man with a clipped white beard, dark gray-blue eyes, a resemblance to Smuts. Like all the others, he studiously avoided looking at me, but I saw him smile at Conchis, the astrologer-magician beside him. Next to Conchis appeared from behind the bird head and pregnant belly a slim, middle-aged woman. She was wearing a dark gray suit, a headmistress or a businesswoman. The jackal head, Joe, was dressed in a dark blue suit. Anton came, surprisingly, from behind the Pierrot skeleton costume. The succubus from Bosch revealed another elderly man with a mild face and pince-nez. The corn doll was Maria. The Aztec head was the German colonel, the pseudo-Vimmel of the Ridge incident. The vampire was not Lily, but her sister, a scarlet wrist, a white blouse, and the black skirt. The crocodile was a man in his late 20s. He had a thin, artistic-looking beard, a Greek or an Italian. He, too, was wearing a suit. The stag head was another man I did not know, a very tall, Jewish-looking intellectual of about 40, deeply tanned and slightly balding. That left the witch on the extreme right of the table. It was Lily in a long-sleeved, high-necked, white woolen dress. I watched her pat her severely chignoned hair and then put on a pair of spectacles. She bent to hear something that the colonel next to her whispered in her ear. She nodded, then opened the file in front of her. Only one person was not revealed, whoever was in the coffin sedan. I sat facing a long table of perfectly normal-looking people who were all sitting and consulting their files and beginning to look at me. Their faces showed interest, but no sympathy. I stared at June Rose, but she stared back without expression, as if I were a waxwork. I waited above all for Lily to look at me, but when she did there was nothing in her eyes. She behaved like, and her position at the end of the table suggested, a minor member of a team, of a selection board. At last the old man with the clipped white beard rose to his feet, and a faint murmuring that had begun among the audience stopped. The other members of the board looked toward him. I saw some, but not many, of the students with open notebooks on their laps, ready to write. The old man with the white beard gazed up at me through his gold-rimmed glasses, smiled, and bowed. "Mr. Urf, you must long ago have come to the conclusion that you have fallen into the hands of madmen, worse than that, of sadistic madmen, and I think my first task is to introduce you to the sadistic madmen." Some of the others gave little smiles. His English was excellent, though it retained clear traces of a German accent. "But first we must return you, as we have returned ourselves, to normality." He signed quietly to my 2 guards who had come back beside me. Deftly they untied the rosetted white ribbons, pulled my clothes back to their normal position, peeled off the black forehead patch, turned back my pullover, even brushed my hair back, but left the gag. Good. Now, if I may be allowed, I shall first introduce myself. I am Dr. Friedrich Kretschmer, formerly of Stuttgart, now director of the Institute of Experimental Psychology at the University of Idaho in America. On my right, you have Dr. Maurice Conchis of the Sorbonne, whom you know. Conchis rose and bowed briefly to me. I glared at him. On his right, Dr. Mary Marcus, now of Edinburgh University, formerly of the William Allenson White Foundation in New York. The professional-looking woman inclined her head. On her right, Professor Mario Ciardi of Milan. He stood up and bowed, a mild little frog of a man. Beyond him you have our charming and very gifted young costume designer, Miss Margaret Maxwell. Rose gave me a minute, brittle smile. On the right of Miss Maxwell, you see Mr. Yanni Kotopoulos. He has been our stage manager. The man with the beard bowed, and then the tall Jew stood. And bowing to you now, you see Arne Halberstedt of the Queen's Theatre, Stockholm, our dramatizer and director, to whom, together with Miss Maxwell and Mr. Kotopoulos, we mere amateurs in the new drama, all owe a great deal for the successful outcome and aesthetic beauty of our enterprise. First Conchis, then the other members of the board, then the students began to clap. Even the guards behind me joined in. The old man turned. Now, on my left, you see an empty box, but we like to think that there is a goddess inside, a virgin goddess whom none of us has ever seen nor will ever see. We call her Ashtaroth, the Unseen. Your training in literature will permit you, I am sure, to guess at her meaning, and through her, at our, we humble scientists, meaning. He cleared his throat. Beyond the box you have Dr. Joseph Harrison of my department at Idaho, and of whose brilliant study of characteristic urban Negro neuroses, black and white minds, you may have heard. Joe got up and raised his hand casually. Anton was next. Beyond him, Dr. Heinrich Meyer, at present working in Vienna. Beyond him, Madame Maurice Conchis, whom many of us know better, as the gifted investigator of the effects of wartime traumata on refugee children. I speak, of course, of Dr. Annette Kazanian of the Chicago Institute. I refused to be surprised, which was more than could be said of some of the audience, who murmured and leaned forward to look at Maria. Beyond Madame Conchis, you see Privatdozent Torvald Jorgensen of Aalborg University. The colonel stood up briskly and bowed. Beyond him you have Dr. Vanessa Maxwell. Lily looked briefly up at me, bespectacled, absolutely without expression. I flicked my eyes back to the old man. He looked at his colleagues. I think that we all feel the success of the clinical side of our enterprise this summer is very largely due to Dr. Maxwell. Dr. Marcus had already told me what to expect when her most gifted pupil came to us at Idaho. But I should like to say that never have my expectations been so completely fulfilled. I am sometimes accused of putting too much stress on the role of women in our profession. Let me say that Dr. Maxwell, my charming young colleague Vanessa, confirms what I have always believed, that one day our great practicing, as opposed to our theoretical psychiatrists, will be of the sex of Eve. There was applause. Lily stared down at the table in front of her, and then, when the clapping had died down, she glanced at the old man and murmured, "Thank you." He turned back to me. The students you see are Austrian and Danish research students from Dr. Meyer's faculty and from Aalborg. I think we all speak English. Some said yes. He smiled benignly at them and sipped a glass of water. Well, so, Mr. Orff, you will have guessed our secret by now. We are an international group of psychologists, which I have the honor, by reason of seniority, simply, 2 or 3 shook their heads in disagreement, to lead. For various reasons, the path of research in which we are all especially interested requires us to have subjects that are not volunteers, that are not even aware that they are subjects of an experiment. We are by no means united in our theories of behavior in our different schools, but we are united in considering the nature of the experiment is such that it is better that the subject should not, even at its conclusion, be informed of its purpose. Though I am sure that you will, when you can reflect in tranquillity, find yourself able to deduce at least part of our causes from our effects. There were smiles all around. Now, we have had you these last 3 days under deep narcosis, and the material we have obtained from you has proved most valuable, Most valuable indeed. And we therefore wish first of all to show our appreciation of the normality you have shown in all the peculiar mazes through which we have made you run. The whole lot of them stood and applauded me. I could not keep control any longer. I saw Lily and Conscious clapping, and the students. I cocked my wrists round and gave them a double V sign. It evidently bewildered the old man, because he turned and bent to ask Conscious what it meant. The clapping died down. Conscious turned to the supposed woman doctor from Edinburgh. She spoke in a strong American voice. The sign is a visual equivalent of some verbalization, like bugger you or up your ass. This seemed to interest the old man. He repeated the gesture, watching his own hand. But did not Mr. Churchill? Lily spoke, leaning forward. It is the upward movement that carries the signal, Dr. Kretschmer. Mr. Churchill's victory sign was with the hand reversed and static. I mentioned it in connection with my paper on direct anal erotic metaphor in classical literature. Ah, yes, I recall. Yeah. Conscious spoke to Lily. Pedicabo ego vos et irumabo, aureli pataci et cinaidi furi. Lily. Precisely. Vimmel Jorgensen leaned forward, a strong accent. Is there no doubt a connection with the cuckold gesture? He put finger horns on his head.